for your time and sharing your journey in multidisciplinary collaboration in the additive manufacturing design program. So we're going to turn things over to our next presentation now, which is podcasting at Penn State, exploring its potential as a teaching and learning tool.
Cool. All right, thanks a lot. So, the title of this is a teaching and learning tool, but I think as you listen, everybody's going to realize that there's a lot more that you can accomplish with a podcast. So you're going to see, that you're going to hear that there's value in the university, higher ed, public relations area. There's a piece here of personal branding. If you are a faculty member thinking of trying to distinguish yourself a little bit, you can gain a lot by creating a podcast. This could be a way to really help you wrap your mind around thought leadership and what your expertise is and how to best share it with the world. So a great teaching and learning tool, but yet it can be so much more. So real quick, I'm going to introduce myself and have all the panelists introduce themselves. My name is Bill Zimmerman. I'm a lecturer in the College of Communications. I teach mainly public relations classes. And in January 2018, I started a podcast called Happy Valley Hustle, where every month, on the first and third Wednesday of the month, I interview entrepreneurs, innovators in central Pennsylvania and beyond. So how about we start off with, how about Jenna? How about you? Or no, let's go down the line here. I'm looking at the slide. Katie, can you introduce yourself and get it started?
Sure. So my name's Katie DeFiore. Right now I work as a digital communications and startup support specialist within Penn State, and I also work part-time with the McCourtney Institute for Democracy with Jenna, another speaker on this panel, and I work as the manager of the Democracy Group Podcast Network. And before those two jobs, I went to Penn State and graduated in 2018 with a degree in journalism. And during my time at Penn State, I took an intro to podcasting class the first semester it was ever offered. And that's where I created my first podcast called An Entrepreneurial State of Mind. And then I continued afterwards to create several other podcasts and podcasting opportunities through the university.
I'm Ray Schmitt. I'm a public relations specialist with teaching and learning with technology. My podcast that I co-host with my colleague, Zach Lonsinger, he's a learning experience designer with TLT, is called the Dreamery Sessions. And on the Dreamery Sessions, we work to share stories from faculty and students at Penn State that meet at the intersection of pedagogy and technology. And our ultimate goal through sharing these stories is to help inspire our audience to think creatively about their own ideas about how they could use technology to advance how teaching and learning happen at Penn State, and also showcase the resources available at TLT to help those ideas come to life.
Great. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jenna Spinelli. I am the communication specialist for the McCourtney Institute for Democracy in the College of the Liberal Arts. I host and produce a podcast called Democracy Works that we started in March of 2018. We produce it in partnership with WPSU. And as Bill was saying before, the show has really been a great way for the Institute to expand its thought leadership, both inside and outside of Penn State. We've had a lot of opportunities to collaborate with other universities and like-minded organizations, many of which are represented in the Democracy Group Podcast Network, which we started earlier this year and Katie manages for us. And we've also been able to advance our connections with faculty throughout Penn State and at other universities as they've used our episodes in their courses. So looking forward to your questions and to a great discussion.
Thanks, everyone. And feel free to put your questions in the Q&A panel there, and hopefully we'll be able to get to them. I would venture to say that you'll probably be listening to the best sounding webinar right now. I assume all of us are using our external microphones to make sure we come through loud and clear, all putting our podcasting mics to good work.
Hey, Bill, can I jump in for a second? I think you forgot Shannon in the intro.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, Shannon.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Shannon Telenko. I am a postdoctoral scholar in equity pedagogy in the College of Education at Penn State. I created a series of podcasts for a course called Interrogating Bias, which was offered once last summer by the College of the Liberal Arts. The course is currently on hold until it has a departmental home.
All right, thanks, Shannon. Sorry to skip over you there.
Okay.
So to kick this off, this is for everyone. Why a podcast? What were the educational goals you wanted to achieve with your podcast?
Yeah, so for us in the McCourtney Institute, before I got there, my colleagues had tried a couple of different things. There's some really kind of cringy YouTube videos, sort of like Between Two Ferns, if any of you are familiar with that series. It's just two people sitting around talking is not really that conducive to a video, but it's perfect for a podcast. And after the 2016 election, we saw that there were lots of books being written about democracy and a lot of conversations happening in the media broadly, but no one was having those conversations in the podcast space. So we thought we would jump on it. And so we started the show pretty quickly in just a couple of months. And it's been frankly more successful than we ever thought that it would be. And it's also helped us kind of keep an ear to the ground on a lot of those conversations and trends that are happening in politics, in society, when it comes to civic engagement, civil discourse, those kind of things.
For us, there wasn't necessarily a tried and true classroom goal tied to creating the Dreamery sessions, but Zach and I realized, I think it ties in terms of audience consideration, storytelling objectives, kind of the goals that we put forth in terms of creating the inspiration that went into creating the podcast, because we realized that our faculty partners and the students who work with us tend to have a lot of really interesting projects that they're working on, and they have, in many cases, really charming and big personalities, and it's a combination of factors that lends itself well to the podcast format. So we gave all these considerations and thought how we could work within the framework of a podcast to tell these stories and let these ideas inspire our audience. So we decided to utilize the fireside chat element of it, where we bring our guests in and we have really an open discussion that's loosely tied into themes such as emerging technologies, innovation, creativity, digital fluency, and allow the conversations to go in a natural direction. We do plan out some talking points and some important questions that we want to make sure we get across to our guests, but we kind of let the conversations flow as naturally as we can. So that was why it made sense to us. We wanted another a tool in our tool belt to help get our message out to the greater Penn State community, and we thought this was a great storytelling tool that we could take advantage of.
For interrogating bias, we needed to take a 1-credit course that was originally taught in person by Dr. Terry Vestio and I in fall 2017 into a 3-credit online course. So I had the idea to create some podcasts, and we had several guest speakers who had offered their expertise on varying and intersecting forms of bias whenever we offered the course as a one credit in person. So I wanted a way to provide students with access to this expertise that would be, regularly available semester to semester. And my goal was to expose students to the richness of scholarship and praxis around the ways in which we might interrogate and confront bias, and most especially anti-Black racism. And, this kind of deep long-term work has always been necessary, and that's becoming more apparent in light of the summer's uprisings around police brutality and other important responses to anti-Black racism and violence. So over the 14 podcasts recorded for the course, I interviewed 19 experts on issues on things ranging from school segregation to scientific racism and ageism and weight bias.
So for me, I got hooked on the famous This American Life spinoff podcast, Serial, just like pretty much everyone else in podcasting. But that podcast came out when I was in high school. So when I entered college, I was already looking for ways that I could eventually make a podcast. And I was really drawn in due to the long form storytelling that was possible with podcasts. People can listen to a podcast for up to 45 minutes to an hour. And so I just saw this opportunity to or like the ability to do stories and people in them justice with podcasting. And I was also just driven to learn all that I could about audio storytelling. My background is in print and writing, and so I was intrigued by the new medium. And I saw podcasting as something that would continue to grow in the journalism industry. So I figured it would be a really great marketable skill to have in my toolbox when I entered the workforce. And so I created an entrepreneurial state of mind right before I entered my podcasting class my sophomore year of college. And then after that podcast, I just sort of went on a frenzy and created tons of podcasts for different departments. I created one for the College of Agriculture's E&I program. I created one for Global Entrepreneurship Week, for the College of Communications, for the Science Communications Department, for KCF Technologies downtown, and for the Daily Collegian. And the goal for all these podcasts for me was twofold. I wasn't really trying to build an audience with any of them. I was really just trying to learn about and improve my ability to do audio storytelling and to get the opportunity to interview and connect with people involved in really awesome things at Penn State to expand my network.
Thanks, everyone. Jenna, I want to throw the next question to you to get it started, because you talked about Democracy Works kind of exceeding expectations for success. You know, none of us are going to be making a splash on the iTunes chart. How did you measure success? I'd like to hear from everyone, because it's you have to look beyond listens.
Yeah, that's right. So, you know, I think as Katie was saying, we tend to hear about the big podcasts like Serial and Joe Rogan and all of these shows, but there are more than 1 million podcasts in Apple's directory these days, and you know, most of them only get a few hundred listens per episode, not thousands or tens of thousands or millions or anything like those big name shows do. So I think if your metric for success is like getting lots and lots of downloads, you maybe need to recalibrate things. I tell people a lot that, you know, if we got 300 people to come to an event that we did in person, we would consider that a resounding success. And I think most people around campus would too. But with a podcast, you're getting people to give you that attention on a regular basis, whether it's weekly or bi-weekly or monthly or however often your show comes out. And I think in today's world, the kind of attention economy, so to speak, that attention is the biggest commodity we can ask for from our audiences, whether it's students, faculty, staff, alumni, donors, whoever it is in the Penn State orbit. If you can create that compelling content and stories that keeps people coming back regularly, you're going to build a much more loyal audience, really build that affinity to your organization and to Penn State more broadly.
For us, kind of an interesting anecdote. So we kind of, in the same way that Jenna was speaking, we've had probably between 100 and 150 average listeners per episode. So we're not necessarily looking at that as a tried and true metric to define success for our podcast. But we did, as we were wrapping up our first season around the end of the fall semester, have someone from another unit within the university come to us about producing a podcast for them. So that at least told us that somebody listening thought we were doing a great job with it. Unfortunately, we don't have the capacity to produce other groups' podcasts, but that was definitely a nice kind of pat on the back to get that somebody liked the work that we were doing and thought highly of it.
For me, the students were required to listen to the podcast each week, and we don't have them available publicly. So it's not as if I can say, you know, that the success is measured a little bit differently for me, since it's only the students listening to it. And of course, the larger goal is that they will engage in this work in a lifelong way in confronting their own and others' different forms of biases and institutional biases. But we did compile some data on how much students listen to each podcast. We found that the most popular one was the episode where I interviewed law professor Shobha Sivaprasad Wadia. The last couple of episodes were listened to the least, and I assume that was because students were working on writing an open letter, which was part of their final assignment, kind of an action-oriented assignment for them to work on. This was a 12-week course last summer, and we created enough podcasts for 14 weeks. So the other piece that I've been thinking about is how there may have been some fatigue in students listening to, in some cases, for a couple of weeks, they listened to 2 podcasts. So it could have been a lot because they were also doing readings and absorbing a lot of information. So that's important feedback I can use when and if the course is offered again.
For me, as I said, the goal for my 2 podcasts wasn't really, or for all of my podcasts was, twofold: to improve my ability to do audio storytelling and then to connect to different communities at Penn State. I'd say I succeeded in both of those things. I now know a lot about audio equipment, editing software, writing for the ear rather than the eye, and interviewing strategies, all that fun stuff that goes into podcasting. And I also got further integrated into the entrepreneurship ecosystem at Penn State through my podcast, which was about entrepreneurship, which has led to my current job position working with Invent Penn State. And so I'd say it was a fairly successful endeavor.
I want to add my own experience here too. And as Jenna said, you really, if you're just thinking about listens, you need to kind of really recalibrate your idea of what success is. And for me, it's been looking at the opportunities that have been created by having a podcast, getting a chance to, present during Global Entrepreneurship Week or lead a panel discussion during, Startup Week, getting to talk to some really cool people, increasing my own knowledge about, entrepreneurship and innovation. That's been the big advantage as well. So yeah, don't just get focused on the numbers. Look at the opportunities that you're gaining from that. I wanted everyone to give, one piece of advice to anyone who may be considering a podcast. What's been one takeaway that they could take from each of you about the potential of podcasting or how to do one well?
I would say definitely consider accessibility. It was our biggest lesson learned from launching our podcast. We could have done a little bit better critical thinking in our planning stage, and we definitely got on the problem-solving wagon real quick when we realized we needed to have a transcript of every episode available to make the podcast accessible to a deaf audience. So a deaf audience is definitely worth considering because you might not instinctually go to them as a potential listenership for a podcast.
Yeah, there's some tools out there. Sorry, that that can automate the transcription process. Great thing to consider.
Yeah, I'd say that one of the biggest things that I learned was to really not be afraid to ask stupid questions. That was the biggest lesson. That's what's going to make a good podcast, and that's also what's going to allow you to physically create a good podcast. Whether that's in the interviews I conducted, asking stupid questions on the podcast that people would think, oh, you should know that, or asking people for different things that I needed in order to make my podcast. I've frequently made requests to people for audio equipment or for quiet spaces to record who are not the right people to be asking, but that person likely would be able to direct me to the right person. And the more interviews that I did, the more comfortable I became asking those kinds of questions, and the better my content and material in my podcast became because of it. So content-wise, I would definitely say when you're interviewing someone, ask the stupid questions.
And I think from an educational perspective, I would say, maybe start by, if you are a faculty member or work with faculty, encourage them to survey the podcast landscape and maybe use episodes from existing podcasts in their courses to get a feel for what students are interested in, if that is the goal, or maybe if you are trying to target people who are not students, faculty, staff, alumni, things like that, maybe see if you can do a survey to find out what people are listening to. Definitely survey the landscape thoroughly and practice. Podcasting, I think we can all agree, is easier said than done, or easier to think about than actually do. So, it's going to take a while to get comfortable on the mic, especially if you don't do a lot of public speaking or teaching or things like that.
I will say for me, podcasting was a lot of work. I was doing that on top of full-time work as an academic advisor in the College of Liberal Arts at the time. I had the support of the Office of Digital Pedagogy and Scholarship there, which was extremely helpful. They helped with sound quality and had incredible editing skills. We had a student intern at the time, Nick McLean. I prepared quite a bit for each episode because I didn't want to use up too much of the expert guest time. And also, I had specific things in mind that I wanted the students to focus on, which was the nice part in creating your own podcast. You can kind of focus it to your educational objectives for the course. I think it would be fun to do a podcast that's less planned and more authentic. My sense is that there's a lot of podcast saturation at the moment. And one thing I do plan to do in the future is to add an assignment to the course where students practice recording their own podcast.
We got two questions that came through, and one of them, unfortunately, we don't know of any one-stop spot where you can see a list of all the university-affiliated podcasts. However, if you would reach out to any of us, I think we all have a pretty good sense of kind of who in town and at the university is doing a podcast. But yeah, unfortunately, right now there's no one place. Maybe that's something we need to look into, is amassing a list. I know Spinelle has a podcast for their career services. The College of Communications has one. So yeah, there's a lot of these. Now, Shannon, I want to throw Marcus's question to you. How would you further make the case for incorporating a podcast into a course?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been hearing more of faculty, maybe not recording their own podcast, although I have a friend at Bryn Mawr who invited me as a podcast guest when everything went to remote instruction in the spring. And we recorded that, and we kept that kind of loose and more authentic, and that was really fun, and she got good feedback from her students there on that. But I have heard of a few faculty, mostly at Penn State, because I haven't had a chance to talk to other folks about it, using a variety of different podcasts, which in talking to students, they sometimes don't see the connection between what is talking about in the course and what's in the podcast, sometimes because there's not enough time. So I think if you're going to use a podcast that's already been recorded for another purpose, you want to think really carefully about how that ties in and how that connects to the other content within your course.
Yeah, and I can just piggyback on that. I've used podcasts for the courses I teach in Belisario, and it's, in every instance it was not my show, a different show that was already out there. I created discussion questions that to that point, Shannon, kind of bridged the gap between what the episode covered and what the course covered, and tried to get students thinking in the right direction, and to try to make some of those connections. But as far as why do it, I heard good feedback that, both pre-COVID and in our current environment, that students appreciated the flexibility of being able to listen while they were going about their other activities, whether it was, on the bus or doing their laundry or at the gym. And now that everybody's kind of learning remotely, they appreciated something they could do while they went for a walk. It wasn't something that they're all sitting at their computer staring at a screen reading something. So I think that flexibility and meeting students where they are is something to consider. I think if you can make those connections between your course and the podcast episode.
Shannon, somebody was asking about how to listen to what you produced, and I know that was created just for internally for the class, but you do have a blog, a website where you elaborated a little bit on what went in how to creating the podcast. So if you could share that in the chat, that'd be cool.
Yeah, I'll share the link I was just doing that now. So
all right. I want to give a chance for anybody to put in a final question or Q&A, but and while people are thinking, we got another one here. Do you have a sense of how students respond to podcasts compared to more visual mediums? Wondering about engagement and learning outcomes with this.
Yes, I mean, like I was saying, in the courses that I did, I found that the discussion was actually more robust than it was when I would assign an article to read. I did get the sense that students listened and maybe had more comprehension. One thing I will say, if you're doing an online discussion board type of thing, to Ray's point about the transcript, when I taught for the World Campus and used podcasts on an online discussion board, I did see several people just copying and pasting right out of the transcript or the show notes. So that's something I hadn't thought about before. So just something to keep in mind as you're setting expectations for how assignments are structured.
Okay, we got a nuts and bolts question here about the editing process. How do you balance timing considerations with the desire to amplify voices? So I guess, you have this raw material. How much time do you spend editing, and how do you kind of balance that need to get it out there, but also to make sure it sounds good?
Yeah. Bill, that sounds like one that's up your alley, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I probably should do more editing than I do. But I think people also want authenticity, within reason. You wouldn't want to have a mistake or a flub or your dog barking in the background. But I do take some uhs and ums out, but I definitely could clean it up more. And I think it's just, you kind of have to balance what your own schedule is like and how much time you really want to devote to it, and kind of what you're getting out of it. And I think that's kind of the big consideration, is this something that's taking time and money to produce, and maybe, you just don't have as much time to set aside for editing. But I think it's a very, very personal question, but I would not just record something and just release it.
And something important to remember with Penn State faculty and students, their access to the Adobe Creative Cloud. Adobe Audition is a pretty intuitive editing tool, and everybody at Penn State has access to that for free. So it helps to make the production element a little bit easier. And there's some really good resources for learning to use it at LinkedIn Learning if you don't have experience with it. That was how I got up to speed on it. Now,
we're running out of time here. I see a few more questions. We can still answer in the Q&A after the session, correct? Or through chat?
Yes, you can.
Okay, great. So yeah, I mean, for these that we weren't able to address, we're going to jump in there and see what we can handle. I think all of us really enjoy podcasts. So getting to talk about it is fun for us, and getting to share things. So if we can be a resource in the future, reach out to us.
Thank you, Ray, Jenna, Bill, Shannon, and Katie, for showing us how you've leveraged podcasting technology to engage your students. We really appreciate your time and are thankful for your insight and willingness to answer the questions from our audience members as we transition to the next presentation. So while we give our presenters a minute to transition to the next presentation, we have some Penn State trivia for you again. So if you read Penn State news this morning, you may have seen this. Penn State Mont Alto's Academic Festival celebrated what anniversary this year virtually, using a combination of Zoom, online videos, and ScholarSphere? Okay, we'll give it another about 10 seconds. Okay, so the correct answer was their 15th anniversary. They've been holding this academic festival for 15 years.